Senator, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Let's do it. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad that we are doing this again, although now, of course, for our colleagues, and I'm really grateful to Chai and to Nonprofit New York for really just being the driving force behind this legislation and what we're going to talk about today. I also want to extend my gratitude and thanks to all of the organizations who are participating in this briefing, including JMAC for Families, the Chocolate Factory Theater, and Lawyers Alliance for New York. And of course, my sister and partner in the Assembly on this bill, Assemblywoman Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. So thank you all so much for being here. I also want to say that today I am joining you all from Pelham, which is on Lenape lands. So I really can't say enough about, I know we're going to have slides go, so I'm going to keep my eye on the slides as we begin. But as we begin, and before we get to the first slide, I really cannot say enough about the value of nonprofit organizations and what they bring to all of our communities. I think it goes without saying that every single legislator, myself included, relies on non-for-profits and community-based organizations to make sure that the funding and the work that we do to really just take the policies and make them come to life in our communities would not be able to happen without our non-for-profit organizations. And so that is just a really important tone that I want to set today, that there's an immense amount of gratitude because you bring so much value to our communities. And so before we jump into more introductions as well as the slides, I want to make sure that I give everyone else here also an opportunity to introduce themselves and say a few words. We can go in order if that works for everybody about what's on the slide, just to keep it.
I'll say hello then. Hi, Senator Biaggi. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. I'm the state assembly member from the 34th district, which includes Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, and Woodside. I too express my gratitude. And as a nonprofit executive, a former nonprofit executive, this work is really important and personal to me. So I'm so thrilled to carry the bill with Senator Biaggi and thrilled to have you all here with us, and especially the nonprofit leaders who are joining us today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to Nonprofit New York for hosting. Turn it over to Joyce.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joyce Mcmillan, and I'm grateful to be here with you all today. And I am a small non-for-profit, and I'm here because I want to see the playing field be equal. Thank you, everyone who's supporting this and standing up today with us. And Sheila?
Thank you, Joyce. Hello, everyone. I'm Sheila Lewandowski. I use the pronouns she, her, and identify as a non-disabled, middle-aged, cisgender, olive-skinned white woman of Eastern European heritage. I have long brown hair streaked with gray, and I'm wearing an olive green sweater. I say this all for accessibility purposes or for recordings later. I have glasses, small dangly earrings, behind me an oil painting of potted plants hanging on a wall painted white. I'm co-founder and executive director of the Chocolate Factory Theater in Senator Jan Aris's district in Queens, Assemblywoman. And I am coming to you from Long Island City, which is the occupied land of the Lenape and Canarsie people. So thank you for.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you so much, everybody. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Chai Chindasurat. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm Vice President of Policy at Nonprofit New York. I'll share a little bit more about our organization later, but just to reiterate what the Senator said, you know, we know from our members and from the work that we do with nonprofits every day that they are so critical to making policy come to life and to representing the needs of all of our community members. And oftentimes it's nonprofits that the government relies on. However, as we'll get into today, a lot of nonprofits don't engage in the policymaking process, and they really effectively take themselves out of the process. So I'm just very, very grateful that this issue is being looked at. It was very challenging under previous administration. I'll just be completely candid, to try and remove some barriers that were in place to nonprofits engaging in advocacy. So super, super grateful that we are here today and we've come this far. And I am also joining you from Lenape land. I am currently in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Chai. I'm Laura Abel. I'm an attorney with Lawyers Alliance for New York. We are a small nonprofit law office, and our entire practice is working with other nonprofits, helping them meet their legal needs. And in particular, we work with nonprofits that serve low-income communities in New York City. I spend a huge amount of my time explaining the lobbying laws and regulations to nonprofits in order to embolden them to be able to speak to their elected officials and to represent their communities in the world of public policy. And I'm here today because I would like to put myself out of business. I would like nonprofits to be able to spend their time serving their communities and not speaking to me or government regulators about what they need to do in order to make their voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for that awesome introduction. So just for everyone's awareness, there are slides that we will be going through, and each of us will be discussing, of course, the contents of the slide. So just for those of you who've just joined, I see that the participants are ticking up. I wanted to say thank you again for being here. I'm State Senator Alessandra Biaggi, and I'm really grateful to be talking about this bill with all of you today. So the bill that we will be discussing, amongst other issues, is the bill that will raise the lobbying threshold slightly to $10,000 so that we can make sure that non-for-profits and other community organizations and community-based organizations have a seat at the table in the legislative process without compromising any of the needed transparency that our lobbying regulations and reporting system provide. I want to just highlight something that might be obvious to most people, but because we're recording this, you never know, we will take a look. I am also the chair of ethics and internal governance in the Senate. And so it doesn't go without saying, which is why I'm going to say this, that it's really important to me that whenever we change our laws, specifically around lobbying, that we are never sacrificing transparency or accountability or any of the guardrails that are around the lobbying industry. Organizations, as we all know, and as I mentioned at the top when we were opening, are the most vital set of services in a lot of our communities, and especially in a large portion of the Bronx that I represent. Many of the elected officials and the offices would really not be able to do our jobs without the support and the assistance of the nonprofit organizations that are, again, bringing those services to the community directly. They are organizations that serve some of the most marginalized and in-need communities in our state. However, why we're here and why this matters to all of us and why we should care is because our lobbying rules currently effectively shut out most organizations from advocating for the needs of all of our communities that they serve and that we care about serving in the legislative process. How? We'll get to that in 1 second. So to put just one very key point here is that according to the National Council of Non-for-Profits, only 3% of nonprofits engage in legislative advocacy. I know that in 2018 and since 2018 moving forward, so many of us have come into office really with the care and concern of having our community and those who are leaders in our community at the table. One of the most important ways that we can do this is through the legislative process. And so as we talk about legislative advocacy rules and reporting, it's important just to focus us. So currently, organizations must report their lobbying activity to JCOPE. We all know what JCOPE is, but if you don't, it's the Joint Commission on Public Ethics, which is the body that oversees lobbying activity, hopefully not for much longer, because it's an entity that was set up essentially to fail by our former governor. So we can do better with JCOPE and we will do better, but under the current lobbying system, if the lobbying activity is exceeding $5,000 in a year, they are required to report. And so JCOPE will require organizations to make bi-monthly reports on their activities that are related to the state. It requires also these organizations to be familiar with JCOPE's 92-page set of regulations, which is complicated. And if you can just imagine this, $5,000 is not necessarily a high threshold. And so what we're talking about are smaller scale organizations that have to take on really cumbersome requirements just to exist. And also, really, unfortunately, if they can't figure it out, have the risk of having to pay late fees and fines for, of course, not being able to get the information in on time. A lot of large lobbying firms will spend hundreds of dollars on reporting each month. So just put this into perspective. So the next slide, which is with regard to non-for-profit advocacy and also racial justice, is really just to turn our attention to the large lobbying firms and to frame why, again, why this issue is so important. And so we know that large lobbying firms, just like large corporations, they have the resources and capacity to comply with state lobbying requirements. And just to zoom out for a second, we saw this in the beginning of COVID when we were thinking about the PPP loan, and the companies and the businesses that got access to that money and were able to actually benefit were those who had that in-house capacity and the funds to be able to understand, what forms do I need to fill out? How do I get this done? And we saw all kinds of resources go to places that really didn't necessarily need those funds, and that the smaller organizations that didn't have that infrastructure really did suffer. It's the same thing here. So our community organizations really find and have expressed to us, and we've heard from them, that a lot of these requirements can be prohibitive to them, even existing. It's especially true for community organizations that are led by people of color, which tend to have fewer assets and also really do rely on more government funding. It is why I think, again, many of us really care about this bill. And so because of the voices and the input of organizations that are led by people of color, and really the fact that they are just really needed in the governing process, we cannot leave them out and continue to leave them out, especially since we know that this is a problem. It is absolutely critical that we remove any barrier that would allow them to be heard and to be involved. The next slide is with regard to raising the threshold. About, there's some concerns about, again, not contributing to more opaque insight into what's going on with our lobbying rules or lobbyists. And again, I just want to reiterate that I really would be remiss if I just didn't mention that the impact of this bill and transparency are something that I am not concerned about. Raising the threshold to $10,000 will impact a fairly small percentage of organizations that are currently registered as lobbyists. And I think the most important fact here is that 99% of lobbying expenditures will still be reported. That is really critical to understand and to know when we think about, well, what's the data and how many organizations will be impacted by this. The fact that 99% of the lobbying expenditures will still be reported or be required to be reported just shows you the immense amount of money being spent to affect the legislative process. And when we think about those who should be part of the legislative process but aren't because of this threshold and other barriers, this is something that we can do to make sure that organizations are able to have a seat at the table and more freedom to participate in the legislative process. And so with that, I will now turn it over to Assemblymember Gonzalez Rojas to continue with the program.
Thank you, Senator. You captured it all. So what I really want to just add to the conversation is the immense amount of support we've had. As I mentioned earlier, I spent 13 years as a nonprofit executive. I ran the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice. I know the burdens it takes to do this work. It's really, really difficult. and the possibility to lift some of those barriers so we can have more organizations at the table. We call this campaign a seat at the table for a reason, and a place at the table for a reason, because we need all your voices at the table. As legislators, we need to hear from all the institutions, not just the ones with big money and big lobbyists, but every community institution, because they are often the conduit to grassroots communities. So this is such an important issue, and someone who's come from the nonprofit sector, as I mentioned earlier, this is near and dear to my heart. So just to update you all, we have over 110 organizations who've signed on this legislation, including groups like NYPIRG, Good Government. We have labor groups. We have nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit New York has done such a great job in working with their member agencies to sign on. It would alleviate this burden for these smaller grassroots organizations and nonprofits to engage in the legislative advocacy process, which is so important. I want to also repeat that raising the threshold will not compromise transparency. I think that last slide was so important because, we believe in transparency. It's really critical. So it won't compromise transparency for professional lobbyists or even those nonprofits that do a lot of lobbying as part of their work. In fact, raising the threshold would allow JCOPE to use more resources to monitor lobbyists who are spending the most money. And for example, in 2018, 4% of filers spent 34%, which is about $89 million of total spending. And for those of us who care about movements and want to see legislation pass that is good for the environment, healthcare, education, racial justice, we need to expand the umbrella of groups and organizations that are able to get involved. Because while the other side has money, we have the people. So I'll leave it there and turn it back over, I think, to Chai, right?
Thank you so much, Assemblymember. And I'm actually going to quickly turn it to Joyce.
Oh, to Joyce.
Good morning again, everyone. What I would like to share is, as a person who's impacted, leading an organization, grassroots, on the ground, in the community, I think everyone would agree with me. Those closest to the problem are the ones that are furthest from the resources. And it's bills like this that will bring us just a little closer to the resource of the ability to have the ear of those who are elected to support us, to support their constituents. How do you support your constituents if you can't hear from your constituents? Because people in a position like me are afraid to lobby because we're afraid of how we could be penalized for doing so. A democracy allows us all to have the benefit of sharing what our needs are with those who have been elected to ensure our needs are met. If we pass this legislation, it will bring people on the ground like myself a little closer to that. Right now, we're not operating in full democratic form simply because there are only certain people who have access. And this bill will help to change it. If only moving the needle a little bit, it's still a little more that we can do. Grassroots organizations speak for the people, and we need to have those people heard. Silencing those voices by keeping the threshold at an amount that keeps us all afraid to do what we need to do does not benefit anyone except for the 1%. Working with us today, passing this legislation, to pass this legislation, sharing with your friends or family who can sign on will make all the difference in the world. It's not just us sharing with you what's happening, it's you being an active participant to help us make it happen. If communities can't be heard and we're systemically locked out of having our voices heard, then there's no reason why our communities, that's the reason why our communities are failing. I don't want to live in a failed community. I don't want to live in a community where I'm preaching to the choir. I'm only able to speak to those who are experiencing what I'm experiencing. I want to have the opportunity to speak to those who can help make the change without punitive actions being taken against me. Thank you. Back to you, Shai.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for that powerful testimonial. And next, I'll pass it to Sheila.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank the senator and the assembly member for sponsoring the bill, and thank you, Nonprofit New York, for organizing this today, and to my sisters in service. I'm tired of fearing retaliation from my government and fearing retaliation from other people for using my voice. Lobbying is big business, and those who make it their profession should register, no doubt. If that is your primary purpose and you're spending all your money or 50% of your money, you should have to register. I don't think this is a big ask to increase the threshold. And as you said, you both stated, the assembly member and the senator, it will increase transparency, not decrease it. It will increase it because more people will be public about their advocacy and their lobbying. More grassroots and organized groups will let their voices be heard. So many are afraid of crossing that threshold and doing it wrong and being on some radar and increasing their administrative burden for something they should be doing anyway. So they advocate underground. That is less transparency, and that is oppression of their voices. Additionally, lobbying, has been said, is super confusing. I put it out to you. Do you understand the difference between being an engaged citizen and lobbying? What is advocacy versus lobbying? I've been told that advocacy is educating people about a cause and an issue, and lobbying is about asking for policy change, which includes fundraising, by the way. But that's even still confusing. Like, I run a nonprofit, and so I raise a lot of money for my nonprofit. I have to support artists. We fight for the rights of artists in local community. Is that lobbying? I testify for affordable housing. I speak here. I testify to keep artists in New York City, to keep artists in New York, to increase the money for the arts in general. That's lobbying. I'm on my community board, where I'm chair of the transportation committee, and we're fighting for safer streets. Should I be registering for that as well? This is where it gets very confusing. And every single engaged citizen, parents who advocate for more seats of schools in their neighborhoods, is that lobbying? So I feel like if we raise the threshold, more people are less afraid to participate. I have been threatened. I've been directly threatened. People have told me to be quiet. They have withheld money from my organization. And this is part of what keeps people back. So we need you to welcome us to the table. We are your partner. Nonprofits and government are the partners to get the services to people. When a rape victim fought for stronger laws to protect rape and abuse victims, as we've spoken about before, Kat Sullivan renting a billboard, she was fined by the state. That is just wrong, and that is oppression. And what if you run a restaurant and manage to stay open this year and you're asking for help? That's lobbying. But all the individual people are spending a couple of $1,000s here or there, or maybe even up to $8,000. That they should not have to go through the arduous process and the confusing process of registering, keeping up with reporting in order to be engaged in their communities and to be talking to you, to sit at the table with the senators and the assembly people and say, this is what's happening in my community, help us. So I just appeal to you to raise a threshold and let more people be part of this process. We are in the room now, new system, new people in Albany. You've opened up so much more to allow more people to speak. So we're asking for that seat at the table that basically all of us collectively own anyway. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila, as always, and for being a longtime supporter of this, this effort. And I just want to share a bit about where this all came from. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. If you have joined recently, my name is Chai Jindasurat. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm Vice President of Policy at Nonprofit New York. And Nonprofit New York is a membership-based organization, primarily serving the greater New York City area, although we do have members in Westchester and Long Island. And I do the policy work, but we do kind of a range of services, and our mission is to strengthen and unite the nonprofit sector in New York. And so a few years back, pre-pandemic, one of the ways that we wanted to guide our policy agenda was bringing together the sector to talk about what are the essential things that you need to achieve your mission. And we landed on a set of rights, and we called it the Nonprofit Declaration of Rights. And there's only 4, but one of them was advocacy, that nonprofits have a right to engage in advocacy because that is how they will fulfill their responsibility to share their expertise with government and with policymakers to improve their communities and to fulfill their missions. And when we said, okay, what does a policy agenda look like for that? And we brought people together, we heard a lot about how many organizations, 501c3 organizations, just choose not to do advocacy at all because it's confusing, because there are penalties with certain rules, and because honestly, they just didn't have the capacity to do it. And so I remember it was Laura, who I'll pass it to you in just a moment, who shared, that raising the threshold would actually be a really big relief to nonprofits who are wary of engaging in advocacy and doing legislative advocacy, because a lot of times when they hear all the rules, there's rules at the city, state, and federal levels. We're not going to go into the city and federal as much today because we're focused on the state bill, but that organizations will say, actually, I'll just be careful and not do any advocacy at all because I don't have the capacity to track all that time and resources. Up to $5,000, like for a smaller organization, that's a lot. That's a lot. The trade-off would just, unfortunately, would be too much. And so that's where this campaign really came about. And as Assemblymember Gonzalez Rojas shared, we've actually had a lot of great support. And with the change in administration, we actually are hearing very positive things overall from government partners and from the sector, and including good government groups. And so you'll see the kind of where we are now. This is changing a bit, but I'm really hoping maybe we'll have some more co-sponsors after today. And I want to just make sure that we have enough time for questions. So I'll stop there and pass it over to Laura, and then we will move into Q&A.
Thank you, Chai. So again, I'm Laura Abel. I work for Lawyers Alliance for New York. We're a small nonprofit law office, and our entire practice is advising other nonprofits with respect to their legal needs. I've been an attorney for almost 30 years, and the lobbying laws are one of the most complicated areas that I've had to try to master. And that I have to try to explain to my clients on a daily basis. I'm really struck by Joyce's phrase, those closest to the problem are farthest from the resources. And what I find when I'm working with those closest to the problem is that they are busy and they don't have extra administrative staff with extra time on their hands to spend the time reading the 92-page regulations that JCOPE has around lobbying, watching the multiple videos on JCOPE's website about everything from how do you fill out a registration form, how do you fill out the different boxes on the bi-monthly registrations. JCOPE just sent out a warning to all registered organizations saying, we're noticing that people are listing legislators who have changed positions. They've been elected to new officers. Make sure that you are recording your conversations with them. You're recording their current office. And if you've recorded that wrongly, go back and fix it. I'm sorry, the people closest to the problem don't have the time to track that and go back and change their forms every time JCOPE decides that there's some new issue with the reporting. Those people need to be out in the community solving problems, learning about problems, and communicating with government about those problems, and not spending their time on filings where there's very little money changing hands. There's very little transparency that's gained by requiring these organizations to report. And there's a huge effective tax on the organizations in requiring them to do this reporting. So I'll stop there so that we can take questions and have a discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Laura. All right, so I think the senator had to leave at 2:30. But again, thank you so much, Senator. We're so grateful you are carrying this bill and for your leadership and speaking to this so well. Thank you, Assemblymember Gonzalez Rojas. I will pass it to you to moderate Q&A until I think you have to catch a train. And then I'll take it over.
Yes, I have about 7 minutes where I could moderate. But again, as was stated, this is such an important bill to ensure, transparency and engagement by our smallest nonprofits. And again, I'm very proud to carry it alongside the senator. Our ask to you today really is to get on the bill and join us in this fight. We want as many co-sponsors as possible. So we can go to the chair of our government operations committee in order to start moving this along. But I'm happy to answer questions because I know it gets a little technical in terms of nonprofit requirements and JCOPE. So I open the floor for questions. I think also I just want to recognize Assemblymember Simons is on her team, and she's a sponsor already. So again, thank you so much for joining us. So it's always great that our sponsors are joining us because, again, as we get questions about the bill, everyone's well informed. So thank you so much for being on the bill and being here today. So any questions? We have such great advocates and legal scholars to respond as well as myself and other members of the team here. All right, so you're gonna get on. I'll give it another minute or so. Chai, is there something maybe that you hear like a misnomer that we might want to just kick off just this conversation?
Sure, yeah. So, gosh, there's so many things related to this issue. I would say that just anecdotally, getting through the pandemic, we had to do a ton of advocacy, and I, on a regular basis, would get responses from organizations that would say, I'm sorry, I can't sign on, like we aren't allowed to lobby. And I would say, actually you are, you can legally lobby, but they would say like, well, we have a policy that we just don't. And it's because of these rules. So I would say like that was a very common experience. I think that there's a lot of confusion sometimes between what a C3 and a C4 can do.
Yeah.
And like what's the relationship, and if an organization is a C3 but has an affiliate C4, like those technicalities can sometimes get conflated. We're not talking about political activity in terms specifically, like we're not talking about endorsing campaigns. We're talking about, engaging in the policy process, sharing your expertise on legislation, which 501c3s can do.
Absolutely.
Right. So
and should do.
And should. We have a right to do, but many don't. So I think those are some of the initial ones. And then of course, anything that looks like it may reduce transparency can raise flags. And so I'm very grateful that I think everybody spoke so clearly today about how raising the threshold will not reduce transparency. And in fact, will allow for more resources to go to oversight of big lobbyists. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Shai, I like to add that I have a piece of a bill in the legislation right now being carried by Senator Bridgeport. And it's Miranda rights for families, ensuring that families are advised of their rights when CPS knocks. And last year that bill did not pass because last year I was afraid to lobby or have conversation, right? Because that's what we're calling lobbying, have conversations with the people who were in seats to change that, to ensure that the Fourth Amendment rights of families, Black, brown, and poor families who are separated every day by CPS for reasons related to neglect 80% of the time. And my bill did not pass because of the fear that I had of crossing a threshold or putting too much money into it. And this year, I'm just saying, this is what communities need. This is what families need. This is what children need to be safe. Everyone had a place at that table, except those of us who had been impacted, who had our doors knocked on, our homes searched, our children strip searched, because we were afraid of what it would mean as grassroots organizations to try to be a part of the conversation. So those in power, those who are the ones causing harm, were the ones able to have that conversation. And we have to level the playing field. We have to have all voices heard. My rights matter, and I should know them. And anyone who's trying to block me from knowing my rights is someone who's taking advantage of them daily and don't want to stop.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you so much. And I see we do have a question. Genesis Gomez.
Hi. First, I want to say thank you to everyone. The presentation was lovely, and I'll be sure to bring this to the attention of Assemblywoman Fuentes. Just a quick question. I know that you guys spoke a lot about non-for-profits that already have had a nice foundation and they're pretty strongly built. How would this affect newer non-for-profits, or like those non-for-profits that are just getting off of the ground?
You want to take that, Sheila?
Sure. So Genesis, I founded my organization, and I was taught from a young age to always be engaged. But once I started fundraising, then I was reminded by government grants and contracts that none of the money could be used for lobbying or advocacy. I started to get warnings. And so you're talking about people who are starting nonprofits. They're doing it because they really care about this service they're trying to provide with and for their communities. And so like here I am, a white educated woman, and I was struggling to understand it. So now as a small organization, almost my entire budget could be going to a combination of advocacy and fundraising. So it's limiting me. Now, if I'm a person who, for like a person of color, not English is not my first language, it's even more confusing, because a lot of these laws, of course, are written, from the history of kind of white supremacy too. But so I don't know if this answers your question enough, but for a small, newer organization, you start and you're like rearing to go because you see change that has to happen. And then all of a sudden you start getting smacked because you're asking for things that are changes, that are challenging the structures that exist. So, so thank you for asking that question. And I hope that answered that somewhat.
It did. Thank you so much.
Maybe I can just add to that, it's the startup organizations. They're started because they see a problem in the community, and they have the energy to try to address it, but they don't have the resources to register with JCOPE and do the monthly reports. They don't have administrative personnel. They don't have money to spend paying a lobbying compliance law firm, which is what the big lobbyists do. So those are the organizations that tend to censor themselves and say, oh no, we can't afford to advocate. We can't afford to speak to our public officials because we don't have the money to spend on JCOPE reporting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions?
We can always share with them how they can support.
Yes, so there are a couple ways. I know Assemblymember Gonzalez Rojas asked directly for joining the bill as co-sponsors, so that's an amazing way. And I am going to drop in a couple of links to ways that constituents can support. So if you know of groups in your district who would benefit from this campaign, and I think they all would, then there are two links I'm going to share. One is a sign on, so they can sign on through this link, and then they can take grassroots advocacy action through this link. So these are two ways you can help spread the word. But also, I mean, we as the advocates, we also really need to hear and appreciate like insights from the legislature, because I personally, Nonprofit New York does not work with a lobbying firm. We are our own lobbyists. So, we're doing this and working with our members like all at the same time. So sometimes, I've been through a few sessions now, but it's still confusing. So if there are things that you're seeing in terms of like what's happening with the budget, what's happening with ethics, what will happen after the budget, and how you think that this campaign could fit in, please let us know, because we need that information as well. Sheila?
Thank you, Jai. I was just thinking about when I've spoken to people, and it goes to what Genesis asked, and I don't know fully how to answer this question, but I'm going to try. Like, how will this change anything? Like, I feel like sometimes people get frozen because like the legislators go, well, how's it going to change anything? And, we need to be sending messages to the nonprofits who are the government's partners, that you want them here. It's one thing to say it, like as the assembly members said and Senator, and they're sponsoring this bill. So, but for all of you, I know you want us here. You want to talk to us. You want to, as Joyce was talking about, talk to the people who are the closest to the issues that we're looking to change. But please really make that a genuine, honest invitation. If you're saying come here, and then you're not supporting our participation by making it so difficult for us to be there, and this threshold of $5,000 and that paperwork is really a lot, then it's not really a totally honest, invitation. And I know you want us there. So it will change things because your invitation will be honest, and then our conversations will be honest, and they will be respectful, and we'll be partners, true partners. So I'm just pleading, because I want you guys to all sign up. We need this.
And I'll also just jump in to say, I know the assembly member and the senator have to get off, but Brian and I both put our contact information in the chat. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about the bill. We're here to answer them. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Karen. Any other questions? All right. Well, I will also drop in my email if you ever want to reach out. And did I spell that correctly? Yes. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We really, really appreciate you coming, and hopefully we can get this bill through the finish line and create more opportunities for organizations to advocate.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.